I had my mother pass away one night, and all of a sudden the questions were, let's say they were a lot less academic. I was always wondering about how does religion and reason fit together. I grew up in a Christian family, but I was kind of encouraged to ask those questions and think about that. People of faith can and ought to think long and hard, and that they need to engage their brains really, really closely. I think the whole question of faith and reason changed a lot for me though. When I was about 15, I had my mother pass away one night, and all of a sudden the questions were, let's say they were a lot less academic. Maybe God's not real if something happened like this, or maybe it's not good. What does this even mean? I remember spending a year from when I was about 15 to when I was about 16 just wrestling with the question of how on earth can you know if Christianity is true? How on earth can you trust what's said? I discovered about the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were a set of manuscripts of bits of the Old Testament which dated back to 200 years before Jesus was born. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's stuff like the book of Isaiah, which pretty clearly talks about Jesus several times, and particularly Isaiah 53, where it talks about a suffering servant that God will send, which is exactly what Jesus claimed to have come and to have done. If you read Isaiah, particularly Isaiah 53, and then compare it with Jesus in the Gospels, it's actually pretty clear. I'd be lying to myself if I said that Isaiah wasn't talking about Jesus. That sounds like prophecy, and prophecy is only possible if God's real. That can't be an accident. So I had this idea then of, okay, seems like God's real and seems like Jesus really is the Son of God. But I still had the question of, if that's the case, how come there's evil in the world? How come I've lost my mum? That sort of thing. It's kind of weird how those questions don't seem that important to people on either side of that question until something happens to them. So I was sort of stuck with, okay, I believe God exists, but I still don't understand why bad things can happen, or why people can die, and why you can lose loved ones, that sort of thing. I think eventually it came to me to be, if I want to believe that there's evil in this world, then I'm saying that something's wrong or something's not right. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, there can't be a wrong if there's not some sort of goodness that's missing. I'm convinced that real evil and real bad things happen in the world, and that it's not just, it feels unpleasant, but that these things are genuinely something wrong with the world. The problem isn't just that God shouldn't have allowed this. It's got a lot more to do with how people respond and people rejecting God. I'd been wrestling with these questions and answers for several years by this point. And when I was about 18 or 19, I had this pretty uncomfortable realization that the way that I had been treating family members through grief and the way that I'd been responding to the death of my mum was actually pretty poor response and a pretty poor way of treating other people. I've been a complete jerk. I think that's where Jesus got really real with me all of a sudden, because it wasn't about rational questions out there. They didn't stop mattering, but God sort of broke through, and with a lot more tears than I'd like to admit to, I realized I needed to ask him not just to be real or to be good in some abstract sense, but to be merciful to me and to be changing how I treated others and how I responded to the hard times. And what's amazing is that by no means means that I'm perfect in any sense, but he did answer my prayer and changed really broken relationships, particularly with my dad, and restored that, changed the way that I thought about my mum's death. Yeah, and gee, there's really bad things in the world, but if God is good, and if he loves me, and if he's willing to deal with my failings, then if that's the case, I can face an unknown future and a messy world, because God is good.